Rising energy costs and concerns around reliability have been making headlines for the past few years.
Families are dealing with higher prices from almost every direction, but a survey of 1,200 homeowners found them feeling the pinch the most with power and gas bills.
It's gotten to the point that some consumers are having to prioritize heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer over basic necessities like food and medicine.
I literally have to decide whether I want to have air conditioning or have something to eat.
And it's not just marginalized communities that are hurting. A quarter of U.S. consumers are struggling to make ends meet.
24% of Americans are struggling to pay their energy bills, and that's for all incomes. So then even when you look at low income, it goes up to 35%.
Nathan Shannon is the president and CEO of the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative, or SECC. It's a nonprofit that surveys energy consumers in North America and works across the industry to share best practices in consumer engagement. It's actually an organization I know well. I've been on the board for about 5 years now. But crunching numbers and tabulating surveys isn't what gets Nathan excited. He's in it to find out what makes people more active and engaged energy consumers and what doesn't.
On the environmental side of things, terms like greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, things like that, those are terms that don't resonate with most customers.
Nathan started his career building affordable housing as part of a community land trust in Georgia. So he knows that high energy costs can quickly turn affordable housing into anything but affordable.
If it's a very inefficient home and they're paying $300, $400, $500 a month in energy bills, that's going to completely blow their budget. So we wanted to always make sure those homes were extremely efficient.
He also knows that earning people's trust takes more than providing good insulation and double-pane windows. It takes active listening.
We didn't want to come in and gentrify those neighborhoods and change them. We wanted to understand what those neighbors wanted, what, for the neighbors that had been there for 50, 100 years. So we would do charrettes and focus groups, and we would let everyone come out to pick the house designs or pick the colors.
It was that work that sparked his interest in consumer research. And in 2014, Nathan attended the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, also known as BEC for short.
It was sort of like hearing a bunch of PhD dissertations in a conference, and the different motivations and values that customers have and why it's so important to bring those to light.
That was actually the event where you learned about SECC, the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative we mentioned at the top of the show. After joining as deputy director in 2015, Nathan rose up the ranks, becoming president and CEO. It's a role that allows him to help utilities maintain their focus on the consumer.
The customer can kind of get lost a little bit when you're talking about utilities and energy. In the past, it's typically been seen as more of a monopoly, and you just, pay your bill once a month and that's it. And so I think it's important that SECC bring that customer voice to light and show that there's some specific needs and wants that are sometimes left out of the conversation.
This is With Great Power, a show about the people building the future grid today. I'm Brad Langley. Some people say utilities are slow to change, that they don't innovate fast enough. And while it might not always seem like the most cutting-edge industry, there are lots of really smart people working really hard to make the grid cleaner, more reliable, and customer-centric. Today, my guest is Nathan Shannon, president and CEO of the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative. We talk about some common communications mistakes utilities make and SEC's approach to education and outreach. We also dig into the results of their new report called Modern Energy Messaging, which analyzes the marketing that best encourages consumers to use new energy-saving services and technologies. But first, I asked Nathan to describe SECC and how it works.
We're a membership organization. We have about 175 members, split between three main categories. About 50 to 60% of our members are energy providers. So the utility, the IOUs, the munis, the co-ops, retail energy providers make up the majority of our membership. And then we also bring in the consultants and solution providers and technology companies like GridX and others that are working with utilities on developing customer programs and messaging. And then the last group is the regulatory folks. So the public utility commissioners and the staff, public service commissioners and staff are also part of our membership, and state consumer advocates.
You guys are pretty unique in that you essentially have two arms of the organization. You got that research for the utilities, for the vendors, understand what's happening with the consumers and their sentiment towards energy. But you guys are also very focused on the educational piece of providing resources for consumers who, aren't as deep in the industry as we all are to understand how these changes impact them. So maybe just elaborate a little bit on those kind of two arms in the business and the goals of the education piece.
Yeah, so the research piece is probably what, like you said, what we're more known for, serving about 10,000 to 15,000 U.S. and Canadian customers per year, and to understand what their needs and wants are around all these different energy issues. And that's all for us, for those of us in the industry, to learn more about customers and help develop these programs and messaging. But the other side of what we do is education and outreach, and we have a consumer-facing website, whatissmartenergy.org, and what we do there is we take what we learn in the research. For example, if we did a study on rate design and rates, one of our studies showed that only 50% of customers understood what type of rate they were on. And we then developed a bunch of communication tools, videos, infographics, fact sheets on different types of rates. So developing all those communication tools, I think, is so important for customers who are out there researching, trying to find some good quality education on these different issues. The more consumers who are aware of a new rate plan or electric vehicles or induction cooking, whatever it may be, the more they might be interested in participating in a program. So yeah, the education side sometimes is a little less known. A lot of our utility members will take our education tools and use them in their own communications, particularly some of the smaller municipalities and cooperatives.
So perhaps a bit of a philosophical question, but it's obviously core to your guys' mission. How do you define smart energy?
Well, basically, it's understood as using the data and the digital tools that we have to create a higher level of customer experience for consumers and not just making it a one-time transactional monthly bill. I think smart energy is more of a two-way conversation, not just a one-way transactional look that it may have been in the past with your energy provider.
So let's dig into the research. You recently released the results of a survey conducted this fall on modern energy messaging. First, tell us who you surveyed and what your objectives were, and then maybe delve into what type of insights you were hoping to glean from this.
Yeah, so this one, we surveyed 1,500 U.S. customers, and all of our research we survey we do everything based on U.S. Census data. So it's divided into the 9 U.S. Census regions. And it was a 20-minute online survey. And all of our surveys, we include a segmentation framework. So there's a segmentation battery of questions that we include at the beginning of our surveys. And it's more of a motivational segmentation framework. It's not just based on demographics. We really want to look into why consumers are making the decisions they are. But the main goal was to really understand, what messaging are consumers seeking, where are they seeking messaging about energy products and services, what messaging is working the best, are these messages coming from energy stakeholders or from their provider or other retailers, and how these messages impact consumer perceptions. And have these messages shifted anything in the energy landscape? So have they really motivated them to participate?
So let's dig into the findings. What did the survey reveal about how consumers respond to messaging from energy providers and, broadly, but also particularly about rising costs and rates, because that's obviously on everyone's mind right now?
Yeah, we did something a little different with this one. With this report, we decided to do a little bit of a relationship building along a customer journey, because we've seen in past research that it's so important to continue to build on that customer relationship. A lot of consumers who have signed up for one rate or a smart thermostat program or a DR program are twice as likely to then sign up for another offering that comes to them. So there really is it's a gateway to that further engagement. So we started out the report by looking at areas where consumers can kind of move along that engagement journey. So like engaging a customer when they recognize a need, and then initiating it which could be spurred on by an internet search or a friend saying something or an ad or maybe a change in lifestyle. And then the consumers get into the exploring phase of it, and that's kind of when they're doing their own research about what are the value of the options that they have and what their values are, why they would want to choose one of those options. And then we looked into the investing side of it, which is when consumers would actually make the choice to invest in the program or be involved based on how well that service aligns with their needs. And then finally, the experiencing portion, which this is the part where this is what it's like to participate in the program, to use the device, or to enroll in that service. And that in experiencing phase is ultimately what will influence their decision on whether they're going to re-engage in another offer. I think one of the most important things that we saw was that customers, 55% said that they would look to their utility for messaging about energy programs and services or rates. And that actually jumped up to 64% when we looked at consumers who are over the age of 55. But the issue was that although they were looking to their utility, the messaging might be understandable, it wasn't quite motivating enough to take the plunge or sign up for the rate or purchase that smart thermostat or whatever it may be. So that messaging isn't quite personalized enough and doesn't really deliver on that real return on investment quite enough that really would encourage consumers to move across the line. So that's where we started to dive into more of some action items and recommendations that we had for making it more personalized and customized messaging.
So maybe talk about that a little bit. How can utilities make these messages more personal to spur the level of action that is needed?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is really to understand what their customers may be going through at that time and be very sensitive to that. Obviously, with inflation and a lot of rising energy burdens, utilities really need to understand that a lot of their consumers who may have never typically had a problem paying their energy bills or the utility bills now are struggling with that. So being sensitive to that and making sure that they are maybe going back to basics a little bit and talking about the assistance programs that could help them, the energy efficiency or weatherization programs, lighting, some of the stuff that maybe isn't as fun and glitzy and glamorous to talk about or exciting to talk about needs to be brought to the forefront, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of consumers who are struggling to pay their bills, and that's the most important thing to them, is just how to get that bill as low as possible. And then even offering, prepayment plans, things like that maybe could help them change behaviors over time and get those bills lower and help them manage their monthly bills a little bit better. I think the other area that consumers told us was that they're interested in more education from the energy provider. So not just the marketing side of things, but using either their utility's website or an app or an email, whatever it may be, for that educational resource. Particularly, this came in around weatherization, electrification, and EVs. Really try to look to the utility for more educational tools. And that's hopefully something that SECC can help with some of our educational tools, or that's what we've been trying to do. But I think even more of that is definitely needed.
Yeah, so obviously we know that rate and cost information is really driving customer action. How about environmental messaging? Are people changing their behavior because it's good for the environment?
Consumers still have a high interest in bring more renewables onto the grid and cleaner energy, but the willingness to pay is not there. They're more concerned with making sure that they have enough to cover their own monthly bills. That seems to be still the highest concern. But my thing is that consumers always have more than one motivator. So if you can talk to a customer about something that might be cost savings or energy savings, then talk to them about maybe one or two other motivations that may hit home with them, then you'll really be able to move them over the line of participating. So if it could be something, you could tell a customer that this would save you 5% on your monthly energy bill, and that might not be that much to them. They don't care that much about the 5%, but if you also could tell them two other key motivators, these are two other things that it could do as far as an environmental issue or something else it could solve. Maybe it could be a social equity, like a neighbor program or something like that. If you could give them two or three motivators, that seems to push them over the line to then engage. But overall, yeah, I think the environmental side has dropped a little bit over just since, I would say, since 2020, 2021, these last few years. It hasn't been quite as much of a concern. And also on the environmental side of things, it's important the wording that's being used. A lot of utilities were doing like green power on their bills, as you could pay an extra $2 to $3 to $5 a month for green power plants or green power. They were wording it different ways. So those really aren't resonating enough. And we need to do some more education and explanation around the cleaner energy sources to customers, and not just expect them to check a box and say, I'll pay more for what you're calling green energy or green power.
Obviously, gaining and keeping consumers' trust is a vital part of outreach for energy providers. What has this and past research shown about how much consumers trust their energy providers? It sounds like it's still high.
It is. Most of the time, trust levels, when we're ranking 1 to 10, have come in right below an 8, sometimes even a little bit higher. So trust levels have stayed relatively high. There's still that kind of that name recognized. So being able to recognize that name, it's something that's been around for a long time, that they really hold a level of power in a customer's mind. And another thing we did see, that customers were, speaking of trust and using the utility or the energy provider as a kind of a benefactor in that energy space, is they are a little bit sometimes confused on why their utility would want them to save energy, because they're thinking that's a lower bill for me, so the utility is getting less money. So customers were a little bit confused, and why does my utility want me to be more efficient? They don't understand that your utility might have efficiency goals that they're trying to hit, and that's part of their targets or things like that.
And how about on the programmatic side? Are there certain things that customers are just naturally, skeptical about, of like how this could benefit me or what it's going to cost me? What types of programs aren't maybe necessarily resonating from your research?
One of the areas that we saw that customers they didn't really understand how it benefited them was just electrification within the home, whether it's a heat pump or a water heater, cooking. Those home appliance electrification seemed to confuse customers a little bit. And so I think some more information on where it's beneficial to electrify. It's not always beneficial to electrify, but when it can be of the best value to the customer and to the current energy mix of that utility, then I think that we need to explore a little bit more. Programs on home electrification have been a little bit of a tough sale with some customers.
Yeah, not surprising. I'll be hard pressed to get my wife to convert to an induction stove of any kind. She loves her gas.
I would say the same thing, but once you try them out, induction's pretty cool.
We actually had we had Scott Blanc, who was at SMUD at the time, on the show a couple seasons ago, and he had been making the case within SMUD to do induction, and he ended up buying induction stoves for a lot of the exec team and said, just try it out. And vast majority of them were like, this is pretty cool.
I think part of that is just, it's easy. That's one of the things where you have to meet a customer where they are.
And you guys are continually putting out research. Maybe give the audience a tease of any upcoming research you're working on in the next year.
We just released a snapshot on Spanish-speaking households. We're calling it Don't Leave Us in the Dark. It's all on engaging Spanish-speaking households that speak Spanish more than 50% of the time, what the changing needs that they have that could be different than other households, and the messaging that's been resonating best with those customers. And then our last study of the year will be on payment plans, and there'll be some areas that we're exploring into rate design in that one as well.
And perhaps I'm getting out in front of this, but because I'm part of the planning committee at SECC, there's interest in maybe doing something around realtors as well, since they can be an educational resource for smart energy with consumers.
Yes. So we're putting together our 2025 research project calendar. And one of the ideas is to do a study of realtors and brokers to understand what consumers are asking them about different upgrades in their home. Are consumers asking about solar panels or EV chargers or, electrification in the home? Are they asking questions around that? And if they are, what are realtors telling them? What are these different contractors telling them, or developers? We want to understand a little bit more about what consumers want during that transaction of buying a home, or maybe even remodeling a home. Do realtors or brokers need some education around these different services or technologies? So it's a new space for us. We haven't done surveys of, realtors and builders and developers, things like that in the past. But I think it'd be a cool look to understand some of the areas and needs that consumers have during that real estate transaction.
We call this show With Great Power, which is a nod to the energy industry. It's also a famous Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. So Nathan, what superpower do you bring to the energy industry?
I think, I wouldn't say it's my superpower, but I think as far as with Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative, just the listening and the bringing that customer voice to the forefront is a great superpower to have, because it helps us develop programs and services that will resonate best with customers. And I don't know if listening is a superpower, but I think some people don't always listen before they act. And I think it's important to always do that and understand why customers are making the decisions they do before we're getting too far down the line and developing things that they may not need or may not want.
The power of listening. Awesome, Nathan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Nathan Shannon is the president and CEO of the Smart Energy Consumer Collaborative. There's a link to learn more about their modern energy messaging survey results in our show notes. With Great Power is produced by Gridx in partnership with Latitude Studios. Delivering on our clean energy future is complex. Gridx exists to simplify the journey. Gridx is the enterprise rate platform that modern utilities rely on to usher in our clean energy future. We design and implement emerging rate structures, and we increase consumer investment in clean energy, all while managing the complex billing needs of a distributed grid. Our production team includes Aaron Hardick and Mary Catherine O'Connor, and Bailey is our senior editor. Stephen Lacey is our executive editor. Sean Marquand composed the original theme song and mixed the show. The Gridx production team includes Jenny Barber, Samantha McCabe, and me, Brad Langley. If this show is providing value for you, and we really hope it is, we'd love it if you could help us spread the word. You can rate or review us at Apple and Spotify, and you can share a link with a friend, colleague, or the energy nerd in your life. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Brad Langley.